my journey toward entrepreneurship really started with buying or being given rather the book The $100 Startup, and it's by a guy named Chris Gilbow. I don't know if you've ever read that. Fantastic, quick read. Anybody that's going to start a business and doesn't know what to do, I would highly recommend it because it it just illuminates different stories of people that start businesses for a small amount of money, number one, and number two, in scenarios where they typically don't leave their full-time job or they don't leave their full-time life, whether they're a stay-at-home mom or they're a, real estate agent or whatever it is, it's like it opened me up to this idea of sort of the portfolio of hustle, right? The hustle portfolio, which I think is an interesting concept that a lot of people are doing now. And that led me down that path. And it was like, okay, well, what do I start? And I landed on the rental business. After a few iterations of ideas, I liked the idea of buying an asset, renting the asset. Cool. That's an easy concept, right? And it's most well known with Airbnbs and property rentals, but it does cost hundreds of thousands, if not more, to buy a property rental, right? So that was an expensive barrier of entry. And I just didn't want to do that. So I ended up landing on renting a set of cornhole that I had in my garage. My brother-in-law had given us a set of cornhole for our wedding. And it's like, oh, I could maybe rent that, maybe. I don't know. So I started Googling cornhole rental. At least, 6 years ago when I started, there really weren't that many options to do so. And I thought, man, I could own that. Like I could own that space on Google. And that to me was the thing I was looking for the most was what can I own on Google? What can I win organically with a website? And so I just sort of landed on it. I built the website. Didn't cost me any money really. I just set up a WP Engine account. If anybody's looking for WordPress hosting, you need to use WP Engine. It's the best. And I built the website. I got a phone line through Google, like just a, Google Voice. And less than 2 weeks later, NC State, which is one of the big universities here, called me and said, "Hey, we'd love to rent games." I'm in my office. Like I was at my job and they called me and they're like, "We want to rent games next Thursday," or something like that. I said, "Oh, okay. Yeah, sure. Of course." And I found this booking software that I had got set up. We actually still use it. It's called Bookable. If you're looking to rent things, Bookable is a pretty lightweight, affordable platform that you can build on and do some specific things. And that's part of the journey too, is like learning how to build a system out, right? But they called anyway, long story short, they called, I did the deal. I used my wife's SUV to like take the games to a park at 1 o'clock on a Thursday. And I went and picked them up after work at like 5:15 and they just left them there. And I was like, that was pretty easy. Made like $150. I don't remember what our prices were at that point, but it wasn't that much money, but it was like, oh, that's pretty easy. It was like 30 minutes of work on each side. And I brought the games home and that was our first deal. And so that opened me up to like the idea of owning a business, right? So that was the first iteration of it was this is my side hustle. This is something I can do on the side. This is something I can learn how to run a business. I can build systems. I can start to rank for this. I can figure it out. And that was the first iteration of Triangle Lawn Games. And so that has led us down another path than I thought it was going to be, obviously. And just looking at the questions you sent over, and we can get into some of that too. But that was how it started, was kind of figuring out, it was that light bulb going off that I don't have to spend a ton of money and I don't have to quit my job and I don't have to do something grandiose to start a business. I just have to start. That's the thing, right? Yeah. So I learned that we try to be useful to people, building out different event spaces in different suburbs or different types of games that you should be playing, or just parks in a city for outdoor parties. Like there's stuff like that's SEO in a nutshell. It's like be extremely useful to people, right? And so it's that simple. Like if you're ever looking, this is just another, I don't read like a ton of books, but there's like a few books that have been really important to me. And Utility by Jay Baer, Utility by Jay Baer, is one of the most extremely helpful and simple to understand books in the history of marketing, in my opinion. And it's all about just be useful to people. Like it talks about, this was a seminal story for me. It was Pampers, and my wife is expecting our first baby in 3 weeks. So it's becoming much more of a story that I'm thinking about now, because it was about Pampers trying to figure out how to be helpful to parents that were on road trips that needed changing stations. And parents would ask Pampers, like, "Hey, do you know where changing stations are?" Or they were trying to find it. And Pampers said, "Well, what if on the Pampers app we offered the ability for people to plug in a route and see all the different changing stations on that route. And then they would go out and find changing stations. So I think they had a team of people that like went out and, found where changing stations were, plugged them into their app, and then allowed people to connect with Google Maps and see the route where they had changing stations. Mm-hmm. And I was just like, that's so brilliant, because that's the stuff that people actually need. And so, that led me to like free downloadable cornhole tournament brackets, or we have a Nerf guide that, it's like, hey, 25 pages on how to run a Nerf party, or we have all these rule guides for different things. We own part of a landscaping firm in Indiana, Anthony's Lawn Care and Landscaping. If anybody needs any landscaping, I'm just a silent partner basically, and we built the marketing stuff for them a long time ago. And one of the things that just drove so much traffic was weed identification guide. So we went through and looked at all the different types of weeds that might grow up in your yard, right? And we identified them, found pictures of them, wrote a brief description about them, and then wrote a care instruction, like, this is what you should use to get rid of this, and then put it on the website. And it drives a ton of traffic because it's useful, right? So that's my ethos from like a marketing perspective, is how do we be useful to people